May as well begin. All right, how's it going?
It's good.
Okay, all right. You all seem a little bit more energetic than you did on Tuesday, so that's good. Because I guess Macon told me you guys don't have lab this morning, so that's probably a plus. Okay, so before we get started, does anybody have any questions about the homework that you did for today? We're going to go over some of it, right? But I just want to see if anybody has any questions about the homework or about the reading. I will take your silence to mean no. Okay, so you may have noticed up here that for next Tuesday, right, there is no writing assignment. I just want you to read about the first 2/3 of chapter 7 and come prepared with any questions that you have about it, right? So next week, we're going to spend pretty much the whole week working on thesis statements, because it's been my general experience that that's the thing that first-year students have the most trouble with. So, we're going to start next time with, we're actually going to start about formulating claims out of evidence today, right? And next time, we're going to discuss, how to come up with a decent thesis, right, out of those smaller claims that you're making, and how to test it against evidence. I also do want to note that next week is the last week for a while that we're going to be using the Writing Analytically book, right? This does not mean sell it back to the bookstore. This does not mean shred it, burn it, throw it away, or sacrifice it in some sort of weird nocturnal ritual, right? Do not do those things. We are going to be coming back to it. But you are going to need Voltaire's Candide starting the week after next, right? So I am aware that the bookstore, being what it is, may have fucked this one up on us, and doesn't have enough copies of this. So the good news is that these are super cheap, right? You can get these from Amazon, bookshop.org, whatever. They're about $3. Just make sure if you order it from someplace other than the bookstore that you're ordering one that looks like this, right? It's translated from the French, so if you get a different edition, you're probably getting a different text. Okay, so anybody have any questions about stuff that's coming up? I guess I must explain things much more clearly than I think I do. All right. So I'm not going to go over the enthymeme homework exhaustively, right? But what I did was I went through the assignment. Oh, one more thing about the homework for next week before I continue. What I've decided to do, since you don't have a writing assignment for next Tuesday, there are some of you who still owe me a little bit of work. So what I will do is declare a homework amnesty for this weekend, right? So if you have things you have not yet turned in, I will not deduct any points if you get it to me by Tuesday, right? So if you have stuff you need to get caught up on it by Tuesday. Okay. All right, so what I did with your enthymemes, right, is I went through your assignments and I picked out a couple of the better or more interesting ones. And we'll just kind of work through them together to make sure that you're getting this and how they work, right? So the first one that I pulled out is one that I actually got from several of you. I was actually kind of amazed that so many of you knew what Duncan was, because like when I first moved down here, y'all didn't have them. I remember when opening up in Albany, like maybe 6 years ago or so, right? But like before, like it was like I had to settle for Krispy Kreme, you know. Like, it's okay, you know, but I'm from the Northeast. All right, so America runs on Duncan. Let's just sit with this for a minute, take it apart, and figure out what's implied in this statement, right? So let's start with the word Dunkin', right? What does Dunkin' sell? Donuts and coffee, right? Yes. Now, is there something in this sentence that looks like it might be potentially metaphorical? Runs, okay. And what does runs on suggest?
It means to sustain or
They need it.
use it as an energy source.
Okay, yeah, it's like fuel, right? Yeah. So runs on suggests something like fuel, right? So Dunkin', or whatever Dunkin' serves, is the fuel that America runs on, right? So what does this suggest about what America actually runs on? What is our fuel?
Caffeine and calories.
Yeah, coffee and sugar, right? So yeah, so Dunkin' is providing our fuel source, right? So that we can, I mean, like I've got, my cup of, slightly cold, inky black tarry stuff here right now that I would not get through the 75 minutes without. All right, good. So this was not taken from an ad. It looks like one of you had kind of just made it up, but I think it works for the example. So dogs are happy. I guess I picked this partly just because I happen to really like dogs. Dogs are happy, so they will make you happy. I will confirm that generally speaking, my pit bull makes me happy, except when she's being stubborn in the morning and won't go for a walk. But what's the logic here? What's the logic in this statement? Dogs are happy, so they will make you happy.
I like to think dogs are sympathetic creatures.
Okay. But is the statement really about dogs or about happiness? Which is more important here, dogs or happiness? Why will a dog make you happy? I think when you say sympathetic, I think you're thinking along the right lines, but try to take it a little further. What does the statement suggest? What's the missing logical link here?
Maybe you are happy because the dog is there.
Okay.
And it's like a companion situation.
Okay, and the dog is happy. So happiness must be the dog is there, the dog is happy. Because the dog is happy, you're happy. So happiness is think about it like a cold.
Contagious.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Clayton. Yes. What this suggests, right, is that happiness is contagious. And if you have a thing around you, a thing near you that is happy, that happiness is going to rub off on you, right? Like a flu. That doesn't sound so happy after all, does it? All right, last one. I really liked this one, in part because I remember when these chips first came out, and I think they were made with something that turned out to be an industrial lubricant. So that's fun. Okay. So now with fewer calories, Lay's Wow chips let you eat like a kid. So what's the implied premise here?
Because you're an adult, you can't eat like you used to as a kid, or else it'll all go to your belly.
Okay, yeah. Adults worry about things like fat and salt content, right? Whereas kids will eat anything you press into nugget form, right? Especially if it just tastes like fat and salt. Unless you're, the picky little bastard who won't eat anything. That was me. But yeah, so the basic idea here is that because these chips have fewer calories, right? You can eat like you used to when you were a kid, and not worry. You can eat without worry, right? Because kids don't worry about what they eat because they don't know any better. Okay, so does everybody understand basically how enthymemes work? Is everybody on board here? Anybody have any questions? Okay, great. Then let's talk about the claim and evidence portion of what you did for last time, for this time, which I think is really kind of the more important stuff. Essentially, with the enthymemes, like what I'm making sure, and this will all kind of link up by the time we're done with today's session. But mostly what I'm trying to do is show that you can pull the implications out of something and see logical connections, right? So let's talk about claim and evidence. So remind me, someone, how do we distinguish between claim and evidence?
Evidence is something that's true on its own.
Yeah, so when we talk about evidence, we're talking about like data that is objectively true, right? At least on some level. So if something is evidence as opposed to a claim, what should you be able to do? What should you be able to do with it?
Draw claims based on the evidence.
Yes, you should be able to draw claims based on the evidence. That's what we're going to be working towards. But to demonstrate that it's evidence, what should you be able to do?
Verify.
Yes, if you can verify it independently, right, then it is evidence. If you can look this up and verify it, it's evidence. So then what must a claim be?
A statement based on the evidence.
Yeah, so a claim is something that you're building off of the evidence, right? So it's probably the best way to think of a claim is that a claim is an interpretation of evidence, right? So when you make a claim, what you're doing is telling me what you think a particular piece of evidence might mean. So let's work with a couple of examples here. And as we're working through these examples, we'll probably pick up some good kind of tips for recognizing what's what here, right? So I'm going to give you first an example from a book by the British author George Orwell. The book is called The Road to Wigan Pier. He wrote it during the Depression. He was checking on the conditions of miners in the north of England. So our first statement here is middle-class people. And remember that for Europeans, middle-class people means white-collar professionals, right? Their definition of middle class is much more specific than ours. When we say middle class, we usually mean everybody, right? Middle-class people are fond of saying that the miners wouldn't wash themselves properly. I write too fast and I transpose letters. Wouldn't wash themselves properly, even if they could. But this is nonsense. And our second sentence, where pithead baths, that is baths that are located at the mine, exist, practically all the men use them. All right, so which of these sentences is a claim and which is evidence?
The first sentence is a claim.
Okay, what makes you say that the first sentence is a claim, Ethan?
Because it's more of an explanation and not actually using evidence to back it up.
Okay. So it sounds more like an interpretation of something. Okay. And is there a dead giveaway that this is a claim?
Where you said that this is nonsense?
Yes. Good. How does this tell us that this is a claim?
Is that your interpretation of it?
Yeah, this is his interpretation of what middle-class people are fond of saying, right? So if he's offering an opinion about this, common attitude, right? So yeah, whenever you see a phrase like, but this is not, or something that seems to evaluate in some way the idea, then you're probably looking at a claim, right? If you see something that says, I believe, or we should, or I feel, right? You're probably looking at a claim. You should also probably not include those things in your academic writing because, we're trying to base things on, objective data and not on our subjective feelings. But, we'll work on that as we proceed. Yeah, but this is something that you could go and look, you could check statistics, right? Okay, like at mines where they've put these bats in, do people use them, right? So yeah, this is the evidence, this is the claim. All right, good. Let's try another one here. This is from the work of a German art theorist by the name of Walter Benjamin. It's from an essay called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. So Benjamin writes that mechanical reproduction of a work of art represents something new. He also writes, the Greeks knew only two procedures of technically reproducing works of art. Founding and stamping. Now, you don't necessarily have to know what founding and stamping are, I think, to make the distinction here. Which of these sounds more like a claim? Which sounds more like an interpretation to you?
The first sentence.
Okay, why the first sentence, Brittany?
Because it doesn't necessarily have to represent something new. It can be something else rather than that.
Okay, so it sounds like a conclusion he's drawing about something. It's like if X, then Y. And then if we look at this other statement that I'm assuming you would regard as evidence, right? So what's this saying? The Greeks knew only two procedures of technically reproducing works of art, founding and stamping, right? Why cite the Greeks here if he's talking about mechanical reproduction as something new? What relationship would the Greeks have to the new?
Is it comparing and contrast?
I think there's a compare contrast element here. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's because he's referencing back to the Greeks' reproduction of art, their founding and stamping.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
that's how he used to.
Yeah, and I think, used to is the operative word there, right? So he's referring back to an ancient civilization, right? And because ancient civilizations didn't use machines to reproduce works of art, right? This must be something new. There's a reason why I'm insisting we make the logical connection here, which we'll get to in a moment, right? But let's try one more example. So this is from the work of a philosopher and psychoanalyst by the name of Frantz Fanon. Fanon was one of the leading theorists on the effect that colonialism and imperialism has on both colonized populations and the colonizers themselves, right? So this is from Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Masks. So the first sentence is, the colonized is elevated above his inferior social status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. So two things I want to say before we proceed with this. One of the reasons I'm giving you relatively difficult examples like this is that I want you to see what sorts of examples you're going to run across in academic prose that you might encounter in other classes, so that you can make these kinds of distinctions with things that aren't easy to read, right? But I also want to make sure before we proceed that everyone understands this sentence. So what does this mean? The colonized is elevated above his inferior social status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. What does this mean?
Means whoever the colonizer is believes they're bringing up the colonized people to their level of understanding of culture.
Yeah, basically, right? So the idea here is that if someone who is part of a colonized or minority population wants to get ahead in society, right, what do they have to do? Whose standards do they have to conform to?
Mother country.
Yeah, so whatever the dominant culture is, right? So yeah, so it's a statement about assimilation, right? So the second sentence is, in the French colonial army, the African officers serve first as interpreters. So which of these is a claim and which is evidence? Which of these is something that you could look up and verify?
Second sentence.
The second sense, yeah. If you had access to them and the energy and the linguistic facility to do so, right, you could go through French colonial army records and find out what kinds of jobs black officers were assigned, right? What's the connection here between this and the interpretation, the claim? Why is this valid evidence for this claim?
In order to adopt a culture, you need to be able to communicate.
Yeah, and what we see here, right, is that these officers are being promoted, right, based on their facility with the French language, right? So because they can speak French well, they can communicate with their superiors and they can move ahead, right? All right, good. So here's what we've been doing with these kind of connections, right? When you just kind of make a claim and follow it up with a piece of evidence, or vice versa, is it always going to be clear to your reader how you made this inference from this piece of data? Can I read your mind? You better hope not, right? Yeah, I don't have access to your thought process, right? The most I have access to is what you put on paper to give me to read. So what I need to see when you turn in an assignment is how you got from point A to point B, right? Not just what point A and point B are. I need to see the process you used to link these things up. So I'm going to give you all a method for doing this, or at least for thinking about this, and then we're going to do a little bit of practice with it. So I believe the chapter mentions this, but I'll just go into it briefly again. So a British philosopher of language by the name of Stephen Toulmin, divides argumentation up into about a dozen distinct parts, right? So Toulmin's full model is a little bit too intense for what we're doing in this class, and probably not super useful to you if you're not like a professional rhetorician, which I'm assuming most of you are not. Really, I'm not either. I'm a literary scholar who has to teach composition. So for me, this simpler three-part model also works a lot better too. So we can boil down most of Toulmin's model to these three relatively simple parts, right? Claim, data, and warrant. Okay, so claim, that's pretty simple, right? What is, what part of argument that we've already discussed can we identify that with? And we were already calling them claims, right? What about data? What is that equivalent to?
Data and evidence are synonymous.
Yeah, data and evidence are more or less the same thing, right? In fact, I actually kind of prefer the term data because that suggests something you're generating claims out of to a greater extent than evidence does, right? Now, what about warrant then? What might warrant mean?
Warrant is like a reason.
Yeah, keep going. You're thinking along the right lines.
A motivator, or a
Mhm.
reason you would want to write about this, or what is a legal warrant, right? What does a warrant do? If the police are given a warrant, for example. for legal searches.
Yeah, it gives them permission, right, to enter your home or what have you, and search, right? So a warrant is a justification. And that's, I think, how you should think of an argumentative warrant as well, right? It's a justification for linking these things together. So to give you a really simple example, I make the claim that I am a US citizen. The data that I use to back that up is that I was born in Pennsylvania. What's my warrant? What justifies my using this data to make this claim?
Your birth certificate.
Maybe think less in terms of a literal object and more in terms of like the law, right?
Well, if you weren't born in any of the 50 states or territory, you're not a U.S. citizen.
Unless,
You're naturalized.
or,
You're born overseas on,
okay, if you're born on a diplomatic mission or military base, right?
Yeah.
Or, how else can you be a U.S. citizen without being born in the United States?
naturalization.
There is one more way. Think less about you and more about who you come from.
Your parents.
Yes, if your parents are citizens, that also automatically makes you a citizen, right? If you're the child of a U.S. citizen, right? Just so we're doing civics here today too, right? But yeah, so essentially what justifies me making this claim is the 14th Amendment, right? Which states, now, the purpose of the 14th Amendment was so that people could not deny citizenship rights to freed slaves after the Civil War, right? But it also, it allows me to justify making this claim based on my place of birth, right? I'm a U.S. citizen because I was born in Pennsylvania. I could also say I'm a U.S. citizen because my parents were citizens, right? But either way, right? My warrant for this is that anyone born on U.S. soil is a U.S. citizen. Okay, so any questions? Okay, so let me try then maybe 2 more examples with you just to make sure we all understand how this works. And I'm going to start this next one with the caveat that I don't know a damn thing about sports. I know very little about baseball and which teams are good and which are not. I'm going to use the Detroit Tigers as an example because that's the team my dad liked when I was a kid. Okay, so I'm going to make the claim that the Detroit Tigers will win the World Series. The data that I am using to justify this, the data from which I generate this claim, is that they have the best pitching in the league. What's the warrant that connects data to claim here? What justifies my making this claim based on this data?
The pitcher will bring out the victory.
Yeah, that pitching is the most important element of winning a baseball game, right? Right. Who cares about that idiot swinging a stick, right? It's the guy throwing the ball real fast that wins you the game. All right, good. So let's try one more here. So I am going to make the claim. Actually, let's start with the data here because that's really what we ought to be doing. I'm going to start with the data. I'm going to say that Wisconsin is frequently a toss-up state in presidential elections. Right? Both parties have won it in recent memory, and the margins have been pretty narrow, right? So, I am going to suggest that the Democratic Party should hold their convention in Milwaukee in 2024. What's my warrant for making that claim? How would I infer this from this data?